to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll be very short in my contribution. Actually, I did not prepare a real contribution, but I will try to give you a point of view from the observatory of our architectural association of Milan. Well, 2 points. The first one regarding the fact that I'm very happy to be here. Um, if the issue is reforming Milan and if the challenge is work together, university and architectural association in generally, all the social strength of a city, I think that I can say that we as the Architect Association are part of this work that must work together. So it's a challenge that we'd like to join with you, with university. And the fact that Miaw, the international workshop, had been introduced for our architect that, starting from January this year, have to follow a professional training. You know, we had this new invention by law. Every year, the architect, to be able to sign the project, must get at least 20 credit every year. And how they get the credits, making courses or coming to events like the one that we are following tonight. So this challenge, we think that is nice to do it together. Regarding contents, I will just say a few words and then maybe I will say something after having listened to the 2 contributions of the 2 guests, the main guest tonight. From what I saw Saturday, when we start making an overview of a project, the Italian group from one side and the New York group on the other side, I realized that maybe our contribution as the association should be the one of give to you that are student of architecture and tomorrow will be architect on the market, to give you some direction in order to find, let's say, a place on a market. You know, in Italy we are a lot of architects, a lot. Maybe nobody tells you when you are into the university. We are a lot of architects, maybe too much, absolutely too much. We are in challenge with other different expertise like engineering, for example. I mean, we do the same job, and we sometimes we get in touch and in trouble. And then we have also other technical expertise that make competition with us. So we have to find very clear expertise and skills in order to get job. Simply, it seems very brutal, but it is like that, like this. And from what I saw Saturday, I think that all the challenge that you were trying to solve, all the problem that you were trying to solve, for example, in Rubattino, or that is actually almost a peripheral area, but also in other project, more located in a more central part of the city, deals with urban design. And urban design, I think, it actually is, for those of you who are interested in this discipline, actually can be a very interesting way to find a part in a market of our profession. Why? Because I mean, Milan, as exactly all the other cities around the world, is a city that continuously trying to change the face and the function, because this is typical things for cities, no? That change continuously the economical strength, the form also. So the fact that, for example, in Rubattino, we were trying to see how in the last 100 and maybe 200 years the city had continuously tried to build in that areas without solving a particular problem. For example, we were seeing the other day the relationship between the development of a city and the development of a railway station. That simply in the last 100 years didn't work. There was a problem. Now, if we think about the idea of reforming that part of a city, we have to try to give a contribution nowadays to solve that problems. Or, in order to make another example, the fact that the Lambro River had been destroyed, I would say, in the last 200 years under the in his ecological milieu, again, was a problem because we have actually in Milan and Italy other rivers that have been preserved better than the Lambro. So again, another problem that if we match the challenge in Rubattino, we have to try to solve, or at least to give a contribution to solve that problem. Or another, just to give you a third example, the connection between the structure of a city of the 18th century, the center of Lambrate, Ortica, for example, and the form of a city of last century. Again, there was no connection. So what I want to say, that urban design gives you, if you're interested in, the capacity of, if you're able to give solution, especially to these processes, give you the possibility to get in touch with a market, professional market. This is not a banal things, because if you put yourself on a market, just a simple architect, without also this kind of skills, it will be probably difficult to stand. And that's why actually the workshop of Miaw, it was interesting actually to me. I would not add any other things. Maybe I will say you something more after having seen your interest lecture. Now, thank you.
Thank you very much. To Vito Redaelli for that introduction. So I would like to introduce the lecture of Professor Michael Swarting. Professor Michael Swarting is an architect and is a professor, and for us was very important to meet him in New York, because he was able to translate the knowledge of Colin Rowe in a methodology for students. So it's very interesting that meeting between Michael Swarting and Professor Giovanni Santamaria, but because in a sort of it's an interesting dialogue between a professor that formed his knowledge in USA and was able to come to Italy to understand from our city fabric, from our syntax of space, Latin syntax of space, how it's possible to produce urbanity and how it's possible to work in a very sensible way to produce conviviality also in a metropolis so huge as New York. So for us to see how he was able to interpret and to know very well the strategy and the physical metrics of our city, and how he is able to translate it in another dimension, in another scale, it's a very good way to understand the Colin Rowe issue. So how it's possible to translate history inside the contemporary or modernity, how we defined yesterday. So history and prophecy that is the question. And I think that New York is a good place in which we could test our position regarding that principle of our project. So also the project about Tribeca that this evening Professor Swarting is trying to explain us. It's a way in which it's possible to feel how that sensible way to act in an urban context transform a huge scale of the city in something that is fit well with the dimension of the anthropometria, and how it's possible to feel a sort of feeling of adequacy also in a huge metropolis. And I think that that is a part of that problem you learn from Colin Rowe and from his capability to analyze, interpret, and project spaces starting from the knowledge of the Latin urbanism. So I leave the floor to Professor Michael Swarting, and after we will try to ask some questions.
Thank you, Antonella. It's our 10th anniversary, I think, since we started working on Milan and New York together. I hope I can deliver what Professor Contine has promised this evening. And I want to thank the Politecnico for inviting us and our students. It's sort of become my second home in some ways. I've been here often and enjoy this experience. I want to thank the whole concept of Miaw. I like cats, so it goes with that well. I want to talk about, I would say, two little short stories, which you can watch on either screen, because it's going to be the same. We know that cities operate and are understood at different scales, from the largest scale of the region to the scale of the human being. And New York City, like I think all cities, can be described and understood by examining its various scales. So my first short story will be to talk about these, what I've identified as 7 different scales. The first scale was produced in 1922 by a civic and business leaders of New York City, an organization that called itself the Committee on the Regional Plan of New York and its Environs. It was a group of people of which Lewis Mumford is perhaps one of the most important as we know today, and was continuously involved in this organization. It wasn't a government organization. It started as this committee. It was concerned with what they called the metropolitan region, which was a fairly new term. It involved 3 states, so it overlapped the kind of jurisdiction of 3 different governments, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And it described itself as being involved in the area that's a 50-mile radius from Times Square, which is obviously very city-centric and maybe a little bold to feel that New York City is the center of a 50-mile radius. But it gave them a territory to look at. And they looked at the regional needs specifically for New York City, water, transportation, open space, urban and suburban growth, the things that we still do today. And out of that, the Regional Plan Association was formed in 1929, and they produced the first regional plan. These are only sort of emblems, but on the left is an image from the first 1929 plan. And it was concerned with those issues that I just mentioned. It was said that it was the world's first long-range metropolitan plan, I'm not sure if that's true, but they claimed that. And then this organization continues today, the Regional Plan Association. In 1968, about 40 years later, it made the second plan. The second plan and 1968 are interesting because they were concerned with suburban sprawl, the issue of local transportation, the commuter transportation issues, and they began to look at New York City as having satellite centers. So no longer was Times Square the only center of this region, but in fact sub-centers. The third plan, which it was titled The Region at Risk, is 1996, about 30 years later. So we went from 40 to 30 years. And that was, in a way, less concerned about the satellite city, but more of a kind of network of exchange between New York City and the region, which, and its more polycentric structure. But the title is interesting, Region at Risk. And the image on the right is from the 1969 plan, and they're way too small for me to go into them, but I put them up as images. The second scale of the city is not involved with geography, it's involved with politics. In 1898, New York City, which was only the island of Manhattan, incorporated other territories into the metropolitan area and into New York City itself. So this map, which shows lines of the Bronx at the top, Queens to the right, Brooklyn below, and Staten Island, were the cities that were incorporated into New York City. And this is a scale, but it's a political scale in a sense. It's a scale that has a certain size, but it also involves much more than the city center and a much more diverse kind of character of New York City. And I made this map in this way because these territories obviously have nothing to do with geography. Staten Island looks like it's part of New Jersey. The Bronx looks like it's part of Westchester and up north on the Hudson. And Brooklyn and Queens are sometimes called part of Long Island. So it's a scale less than 50 miles, but also of a very different character. The third scale on the left is a scale made up of some incidences, and I'll trace a little bit of that in a moment, but I want to kind of go through these scales from large to small. And this next scale of Manhattan involves the structure of the 1811 Commissioner's Plan, which established the street pattern and the avenues north of Washington Square. But outside of, and not even thought of by the commissioners, I've made this diagram that shows from Park Avenue over to Fifth Avenue, going from right to left, 6th, 7th, and 8th Avenue, three of those terminating in Central Park, the large rectangle, and Broadway. Broadway, which the commissioners didn't recognize as being anything at the time, continued to exist on its own will of some sort and power. And it was originally perhaps a Native American trail between the lower part of Manhattan and Albany at the top of the Hudson. Became instrumental in this scale that I'm presenting. Because every time Broadway crosses an avenue, it creates a major crosstown street. And at every one of those intersections, there's one of the important spaces of the city. So at the bottom is 14th Street crossing, and the next is, well, I should say Union Square and Park Avenue, the beginning of Park Avenue. Then there's Madison Square and 23rd Street, Herald Square, 34th Street, Times Square, 42nd Street, and then a little bit of slipping around Columbus Circle at 59th, but could have been or should have been at 57th. There's an interesting little ambiguity there. So this creates a network of a pattern at a certain scale. And this pattern is interesting because the centers of these spaces are critical, but where the streets end is not so important in Manhattan. They go till they hit the water or places. The ends of the grid aren't important. It's really this central interaction between streets, avenues, and particularly at this scale, Broadway. The next scale on the right is one that comes much more directly from the Commissioner's Plan, 1911 plan above Washington Square, which was all settled. So it's sort of important to know that above Washington Square there were small towns and farms in 1811 that continued to persist even as New York City developed with this plan. But the Commissioner's Plan, with the help of some historical background, because I think there are more clever things than maybe these commissioners were, laid out the strategy for major avenues running north-south, 100 feet wide, mixed use, big scale, and minor streets running east-west as residential streets. 100-foot wide avenues, 60-foot wide residential streets. Long residential streets, short segments in the avenues. So the whole syncopation of the city is sort of structured on this rhythm. And I think it's important to see this sort of block formation that I'll come to as creating, I suppose, what weavers are more concerned with, a kind of multi-direction where stuff going one way is different from stuff crossing it going the other way. This was the Commissioner's Plan, and I'm sure that you can not see very much of it. It's nice that they drew the topography. I thought that was quite clever of them. And they have, in the bottom part of the plan, put New York City as it was, and in very faint lines, I think you can see this grid that they proposed to run wherever it went, over hill, towards water, whatever, as a system which they explained as being sensible for the sale of real estate. So it had no spatial thinking to it, and there was very little open space. What was set aside never became the real open space in New York. But nevertheless, this provided the kind of fabric, tessuto of New York City that that we I've explained with the other grid. Some part of the reason for the Commissioner's Plan was that the British had common lands up through the middle of New York City, and because that was held by a government, it was available and not privatized to be useful for the commissioners. And you can see in these two diagrams the influence of this past on the creation of the Commissioner's Plan of 1811. You can also, well, I should say that the avenues aren't an equal increment. All the streets are very rigorous in their dimensions. The avenues, however, are spaced somewhere between 600, a little more than 600, and a little more than 900 feet. So there's a great deal of variation. And that variation comes, in fact, from this, the Commons land property allotment. Also, the commissioners had thought that, I probably should have asked how many of you have been to New York. I assume probably most all of you have. Lexington Avenue and Madison Avenue were thought to be alleyways, an alleyway system, and interestingly, Madison Avenue became Madison Avenue of great importance in later times. So even that aspect of the Commissioner's Plan evolved in different ways. The next two scales, I think, also aren't physical, but they're kind of social cultural scales. And on the left, I've diagrammed districts which don't have distinct boundaries. They're a little fuzzy on the edges, but they are places, they're a kind of scale of New York known as these clusters of different, sometimes physical characteristics, sometimes social, cultural characteristics. So the financial district, we know, Tribeca and Soho are very new in the second half of the 20th century. Chinatown has evolved. Greenwich Village is old and kind of stable on the west side, but new and was quite changing on the east side in the second half of the 20th century. Chelsea has exploded. It was quiet not so long ago. So these are dynamic districts. And there are just a few. On the right is another scale of the way we know the city. And they are also, you might say districts, but they're actually sort of little enclaves of identity within these bigger districts. So for instance, where I have Midtown on the left, on the right you can see Midtown, Midtown South, the Garment District, which is very distinctive. It is in Midtown, but it's its own thing. Hell's Kitchen is a historical name, interesting to conjure up. Upper West Side is broken down. Lincoln Square wasn't there until they created the cultural element there. So these also have grown over time. They're sort of flexible, but probably in a Kevin Lynch sense of districts, it's how people understand where they are in the city. And they have a scale between these two. The origins of New York City are not that 1812 grid. They're New Amsterdam, no doubt a relationship to Old Amsterdam, but the structure of New Amsterdam, which even had canals, where'd this go? I think you can see some canal structure up through this portion. But the significant difference between Old Amsterdam and New Amsterdam is Broadway. This doesn't work now. It's pretty clear in the map, which is a north-south street starting at the Battery, as it still does, and stretches all the way to Wall Street in this map to form the earliest part of the city. By the time the 1811 plan was made, we have a kind of growth in multiple directions that comes out of the kind of New Amsterdam plan, mostly following the waterfront. So you have the next generation, is this section. You can see it's parallel to the water. Then along the village, it's related to the Hudson River, and even the area of the East Village and around Tompkins Square and so forth, sort of projections in from the water. Very different from the idea of the Commissioner's Plan. So this system gets transformed, and it's interesting that Broadway, which you can see on the top here, on the diagonal, and the anomaly to the system, is the system south of 12th Street in Manhattan. So Broadway is the kind of critical armature of the, all the way back to the New Amsterdam plan, going up till the Commissioner's Plan occurs and then goes onto its sort of breaking the system trend. That was a little bit of a side, but I thought I needed to place these other issues into that sort of historical context. The final scale is the block, and the block is created by this avenue to street relationship, which I've described. The fact that it's a rectangle and not a square has implications compared to Barcelona. And the fact of the different widths and the kind of character that comes from those conditions of quiet versus active and so forth. But within the block there was a pattern, and this has to do with the real estate interests of the commissioners, of subdivision. And in the right-hand corner you can see the 100-foot by 25-foot slot that buildings could be put into and would fill the block with a facade on the street and a yard in the back, and a very British kind of pattern of the party wall, not courtyard types, but these long striations. So that's sort of the scales of New York in sort of fairly quickly, but I think it helps describe New York, but I think it's something to always look for in every city, because it clearly exists between, and now that in this, certainly the second half of the 20th century, that we understand the region much better as an important element, not just feeding the city, but in fact the city feeds the region in our later awareness of that, down to the sidewalk block around a block. In the early 90s, in my practice with Behan Karahan, we had an office in Lower Manhattan and proposed a study that we got some grant funding for, to study what we call the open spaces of Tribeca. And Tribeca, you probably all know, but it's the triangle below Canal, euphemism. Soho is south of Houston. It's not London. And so on the left you can see shaded in the triangle bounded by Canal Street on the north, Hudson River to the west, the sort of City Hall, Broadway to the east, and slightly vague boundaries down towards the World Trade Center on the south. What we found there in our neighborhood at the time was that, in fact, there's a whole bunch of spaces that are undeveloped because they seem to have just been deposited there by the street system. And on the right are 8 sites that we proposed to study that had no particular character, except maybe the biggest round one, which is the entrance into the Holland Tunnel. But on the upper left is the end of Canal Street. And I should say, it's interesting to me that since that time, most of these have happened in the kind of 6th to the 5th way. The plan was posited and it worked. It was done by other people over time. But anyway, there's from the upper left to Canal Street to the center bottom of Chambers Street, we identified these sites. And we studied the grid patterns, these 2 conditions, the Broadway, which becomes the plan above, and the still remnants of the projections in from the rivers and the waterfront areas that affect the area of Tribeca. So we sorted out 2 different grid systems, which in fact are in this, I think in this cubistic way of sort of simultaneity, fluctuate. I think like a lot of the grid does right outside here, where you're not sure if you're on the diagonal or the orthogonal until you know it well enough. But this Tribeca has this characteristic of the overlapping of these 2 systems. So we're looking at tiny little triangles left from 2 grids crashing into one another. And we asked ourselves, what does this relate to? Do we just do little triangles? Do we identify Tribeca, or is there a bigger structure that these triangles somehow relate to? And drawing the avenues on the right, from the right-hand side to the left of 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Avenue, as they hit Central Park, as you project them down, although they grew the other way, projected up, they all converge in Tribeca. So the source of the avenue system, which we think of as the 1811 plan, just put on there, or the Commons plan, interestingly engages the area of New Amsterdam and the growth into the village, and sponsors, it's the kind of seeds of the projection of the city as it grew to the north. So this seemed like we should reveal this to the people of Tribeca. They're sitting on the source of 8th Avenue, even though it seems very far away. And this was a sort of critical diagram for us to see. And here we've gone to the biggest scale we could find to look for influences on our tiny little square scale of triangles. In these two figure ground drawings, the left is the way New York is, and the right is our plan. And I think you can see our plan is sort of modest. It's hard to find. It's we were talking the other night about chameleons, that it's sort of hidden because these triangles actually were there, and we're restructuring them in minor ways. We're not changing their configuration. We're changing their identity in ways. We were able to work in the Hudson River, working with some early river ecologists who took over one of the piers to do studies on how to clean up the Hudson River. So the big hook up at the top of Canal Street down to Battery Park City was also, we also looked at that and took that on as a little piece that we could play with. These are three-dimensional projections looking from north to south. Again, I won't talk about them too much, point them out, but they're subtle. For instance, that's the Holland Tunnel, where we proposed a big playground on top of the road, to the spaghetti that's underneath it, and exists today. And the other ones are in that texture, but this provides the kind of physical characteristic that those triangles are in. On the left, we made a diagram of the kind of sequence, flow of spaces. They don't have a lot of clear definition. They're a mix of the two grids. And interestingly, in the sequences that we were looking for, most of the Hudson River grid is plays a role, and not so much as the New York City grid, if I separate those two, until it gets into Battery Park, where the whole plan, the 60s plan of Battery Park, was to try to actually weave these two grids together as well. On the right are our little spaces, the surrounding kind of street walls of those, and they tend to be much more the integration of the two grids. Left is again the figure ground of the finished project, and the right is a kind of reversal of the network of open spaces. Our little triangles kind of in the center of the plan, and the kind of other spaces, City Hall on the lower right, and the whole waterfront sequence on the left on the Hudson. And so we were able to position our triangles into a bigger network of open space. Then we took three of these spaces to look at as kind of case studies. Duane Park, Hudson Triangle, which became named as Bogardus Triangle after the cast iron architect, and Finn Square. And we made a kind of list of elements. So now we're going to a tiny scale. We're not just talking about the space, but we're talking about how to modulate the space, and what were the things that we could work with to do that. We have context at the top, form, paving, gates and fences, trees and planting, and urban furniture. Context was important because each of these triangles was in a different kind of condition to create a different kind of park or milieu. Duane Park, which on the right is the upper triangular one, is it's sort of embedded into the residential area of Tribeca, and is a passive space that you can sit in, you can get in the middle, you can kind of be enclosed in the space. On the bottom right, the Bogardus Triangle or Hudson Triangle is right at the intersection of Chambers, which goes to City Hall and the municipal building, to the right, to the waterfront to the left. It's a subway stop. It's a very busy intersection of West Broadway and the beginning of 8th Avenue. So we marked that with information. Because of that, we created, and with the community, we worked with the Tribeca Community Association and Community Board 1, we developed an idea of a park that you looked at, that you would, what we call a viewing garden, because there's no time to stop. Everyone's moving, as opposed to Duane Park. And then at Finn Square, which is kind of in the lower part of the drawing on the right, we proposed closing off a section of streets that, because there's so many streets coming together at the two grids, that we could in fact make a pedestrian connection to three of our other spaces that go to 7th Avenue and 6th Avenue. So they are the origins. That little guy on the right is the beginning of 6th Avenue. And they all have different names, so people don't recognize this condition. In every one of them, with a paving system, we proposed the grid, the two grids. So the paving in every one would explain Tribeca, the triangle below Canal, with the grid system. The gates and fences varied depending on whether it was a passive park, a viewing garden, a walking through space like Finn Square, and trees and planting and urban furniture all were used to develop the particular character to make these fit nicely into their context. These are the three triangles. This is actually Bogardus on the left, which we were trying to create a little false perspective up 8th Avenue, because we found that space on the edge over there actually is in the middle of 8th Avenue. So in one place you could sort of safely stand in the middle of a street, and we wanted to point that out with our recognition that this begins 8th Avenue. And then there's the other two spaces, the Finn Square on the right, where we actually had the wonderful opportunity to design the subway station underneath and the entry to the subway. My first building in New York. 2 columns. And a roof and a gutter. So these are the three spaces, the viewing garden on the left, the passive enclosing space in the center, and the walk-through condition on the right. Views of the same thing. This is the perspective going the other way on the left, the enclosed garden and the pedestrian walkway, which has the Empire State Building in view. Because we worked with the community, we were able to, in a kind of bottom-up situation, we were able to have an exhibition in Tribeca. It was beginning to be a kind of arts center that got priced out and moved to Chelsea and Hoboken and other places, as has always happened. And the Department of Transportation said, okay, we'll build one. And they built Bogardus Triangle. And you can see we didn't get our wish of 2 pavings to sort out the grid, but we did get the grid etched deeply into the concrete. So it gives an impression of what we're trying to achieve. And this is the viewing garden. So I'll sort of end with a few views of what could we do with that. We're invited to Milan. We're given an area that we don't know much about, the Rubettino area. And we tried, before we got here, before students had seen Milan, to study certain things and to kind of apply this notion of different scales. So what is the scale of Rubattino? I think we were a little shocked when we got here, but we tried to learn. And we tried to learn from looking at things that were known. We tried to learn from the Piazza del Duomo, the Galleria, the Piazza La Scala, and that whole sequence. And that's been a valuable tool to measure what we're looking at. We looked at the two rings and spaced the gates from those. On the right, San Lorenzo, out to Porta Genova, and San Ambrogio on the left, and the two remnants of the gates. Interestingly, the Stazione at the Porta Genova is outside of the wall, and we're outside of the wall, so there's interesting lessons we could look at. Porta Romana, and then Porta Venezia with the whole network to the Piazza Repubblica and the gardens and so forth. So we kind of came with that bit of information to try to understand the scale, but we also knew that we had to deal with this scale. And a number of our students aren't going to stop at Rubattino. We're going all the way to Sagrate, and we're going to look at the rail yards and so forth for the rest of our semester. So the little rectangle on the right of our site for this 2 weeks is going to become a bigger investigation of those relationships. So as I say, I think trying to show you the scales of New York, a project in New York that tries to deal with those, and seeing where we go with Milan has been valuable for us, and hope this has been interesting for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Michael Swarting. I think that, as I promised, that lecture is quite inspired by our Latin city fabric and the capability to produce urbanity using very, very little but shared project within the city and the citizens. I don't know which is the dimension of that kind of very, very little triangular plaza, more or less, because if the block is 25 for 100, this triangle.
It's about, they're all less than 100 meters in their longest dimension.
So,
Quite a bit less, probably half that.
of 50 meters for 100. So as you see, working with scales is possible to conceive different layers, different pattern. Professor Swarting, I only wanted to quote some keywords: human being, regarding to the life inside a huge metropolis, a network pattern of a certain scale, so not only in Rubattino but also all over the project of the Riformare Milano, we have to try to produce a network of public spaces that could produce a sort of new layer that could conceive that empty spaces inside the city as a new layer of the city. Everyone, and so, but we have to understand at which scale they are working. Other very important concept is, I think, that it's a concept of district, and district is a place in which people could understand where they are in the city. So the problem of the identity of a place that is mostly a place which we are inside, and so that is a sort of backyard, a sort of scene for our life. And that idea that we have to be able to overlap different system and to produce some hinge point at a certain scale, so we have to produce a pattern of that connection that could produce a link between different scale and different layer of the city. So finally, if the question is what time is the scale of that city, is a very famous title of a book of Kevin Lynch. I think that the research question of Professor Santamaria is dealing with that problem. So we are not dealing about which is the scale of that place, but also which is the time of that place. So you have to understand which is the new time, the new way of living the city according to a sort of zeitgeist, spirit of time. And that is because, as I said before, it's very interesting that meeting between Professor Swarting and Professor Santamaria, because if the Professor Swarting is moving from USA to Europe, Professor Giovanni Santamaria is traveling, is going from Europe to opposite direction to USA. And it's very interesting because Giovanni born in that environment, so in the problem of the scale, in the problem of the overlapping of different layers, but going to New York and going in a city, in a new metropolis, was able to produce a very sensible architecture, but within new context, because the question is not only the scale, but the time of the new places, in which way we are using the city. That is not only a human time, but it also is a time of nature. As we know, the problem of New York now is facing with a very important issue regarding the climate change. So the time of the nature that for the first time is dealing with the time of the city and is dealing with the time of the citizens. So that could be a new content for our way to face the different scale of the city, the different pattern of the city, and finally the different consistency of our architecture. So which is the time of our city, which is the time of our building regarding the new content, that's the sustainability, that is not only economical or energetical, but is mostly cultural, are the new issues that we could inlay in our architecture. So I leave the floor to Professor Santamaria, and I hope that we enjoy his lectures that sometimes are very creative.
Thank you, Antonella. Thank you for inviting me and students here, and it's a pleasure. And thank you for the organizer of this Miaw, which create an interesting platform for a dialogue and cross-contamination, or as I was correct, fertilization of ideas and approaches and methodologies of seeing and analyzing the spaces around us. Yes, I learned a lot about scale because they make me eat at a breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day for 3 years doing my PhD, thanks to Antonella and Professor D'Alfonso. But I understood why afterwards. So I'll try to be brief as much as I can anyway. So that and even more, I think, is in our fascinating and difficult but still interesting and complex landscape. I think that there's a brief, it's one of the a series of brief documentary, or I will call also a kind of brief books that visual books that he composes. It's able to represent the complexity of our landscape, and those are continuously transforming while we are talking here, and how many different scales and elements and the heterogeneity of characters and identities that are simultaneously present and acting and interacting in our space while we move or while we design. So that's all the, those are, I think, all, and there is even more than that, that we have to deal with when we are thinking and designing at the scale of a city, which now is more and more involved with the scale of the territory in which cities are located and in which cities are able to interact. And this is a kind of a combination of two main kind of environment, the natural one and the cultural one, that I try to kind of synthesize in this brief list of elements which characterize both of them. The natural environment, so geology, geography, topography, ecology, and we can add hydrology and other specific elements, and cultural environment, which are the way we transform those lands to make that productive, urban settlements, social, political, economic issues, infrastructural networks. A series of, I in some way try to organize this conversation with you in a way that it's a sort of theatrical presentation of it. So this is the prologue of the first act, the opening, right? So our territories and our geographies, the physicality of our geography has been characterized and deformed from by a series of processes, often processes related to needs of look for resources, natural resources, or trade around the world. Those have shaped and reshaped continuously our territories and have created different levels of relationship among those territories, deforming also the structure of the way we perceive the space and we move through the space. And with this different way of connection or connectivity, the geography has changed also because of the different means of transportation that we use, which create that collapsing between time and space that we were talking before, and that overlapping of dimension that while one is shrinking, the spatial one, the other one, while one is shrinking, the time one, the other one is growing, which is the spatial one. So the contraction of time and the extension of space has been contemporarily developing and growing. So we have also immaterial kind of connection and system of mobility. Virtual movement, the movement of thoughts, of technology, of our movement, the movement of ideology and of experiences. We are in some way here, and you were, when you were in New York, part of those, for the one of you who were there, part of those exchange of virtual things. You are physically there, but it's your ideas, your thoughts, your understanding of the space you move in and the way you act in that space that is also virtually going to contaminate mutually those places where you are happen to work by. But then we have also other kind of movements and other kind of needs connected to issues that now become more and more important and pressing at global scale, not only in New York, because we can analyze what happened in New York with Sandy or what happened in New Orleans or what happened in Haiti as kind of sort of paradigmatic tragedy or natural, which we could have forecast or not, but anyway, those are paradigmatic for a situation which is extended to all over the world, as the map of the flooding zone all over the world shows. So we have black, which it's the water, so I have some black, but you see the background is white. Black into the major kind of lower area, into the continent where we are used to see cities, where we now see cities. As well, we can see from the global warming effect that the raise of the temperature is creating and reshaping a new kind of geography and is opening and closing new place to life, perhaps. Those are elements which are going to interact with, and those are elements which are going to define the way we will move, or we are already moving. And a brief intermission just to understand exactly what is, and since my background is, my culture is Italian, and my background is Italian, so I have to go to philosophy and literature all the time. I feel better in some way. So I try to understand, and I think it's important for all of us trying to understand the meaning of the word we use and kind of the etymology of those words and the philosophical and the literary background of this one. So what is the landscape? We call this mysterious landscape and urban landscape and landscape urbanism, and we heard about this landscape every time and everywhere today. Everything is landscape. There is also, also a title of a book, Everything is Landscape. So the landscape is mainly the shape that the environment gives to the territory. But then, okay, what is the territory? So dictionary, territory, landscape, space, what are those elements? So there is a sort of, I try to simplify in this chart a quantity of information and a quantity of study pretty articulated, but in some way we have a perceptual and aesthetic nature of the landscape, an historic and a geographic nature of the landscape, and an ecological natural landscape. And each one of them, as you can see, are related to specific content and have specific forms and have specific tools to express themselves. So the perceptual aesthetic nature value of the landscape is a synthesis of the image and sensory. So are the visual values, so are pretty individual. Each one of us has his own in relation to his own personal experience, not only to his own cultural background. Then there is an historic and geographic value of meaning of the landscape, which deals with the synthesis of territory and environment. And you can see the spatial meaning and the biological meaning of both of these words. So it's a pretty articulated and difficult sea we have to move through if we try to understand what is this landscape. And I don't think that this chart is complete or absolutely covers all the characteristics, but just try to simplify those. So the prima vicenda, the further act, the second act of this. So we define, and I'm glad that we see again Serlio tonight. And, but I'm trying to, it's interesting because, yes, I believe that we need to understand the differences and why we need to go back to Serlio and how we can use Serlio to move forward and perhaps to try to understand what is around us and why we are where we are. Anyway, this is kind of an attempt to describe the main steps of our understanding of the city and how easy it was for these people in the 1500 and 1600 to understand what city was, because it was clear. City was whatever was inside the wall, and outside the wall there was productive land and then wildness and danger and then the mysterious nature, right? So pretty easy for them. They didn't have a landscape which was completely urbanized, which was completely covered by human traces and by infrastructural elements or built elements. So it was easy to understand this dichotomy, this dualism between what is inside, what is urban, and what is urban is not. While today, I mean, it's pretty difficult because those thresholds are more and more fragile and ambiguous, and we cannot really see where is Milan and where is Milan is not. We are in Rubattino, we have the feeling that we know that we are in Milan. We are in some place that is not, of course, the center of Milan, is not the open countryside, but is a part of that. And if we go towards the open countryside, where is that? I mean, we don't see the threshold of that. We keep seeing buildings, we keep seeing streets, we keep seeing industries, we keep seeing a mixture of productive land and residual places, and it's all kind of in the realm of the human being in some way. So I'm trying to say from that vision, the 1500, 1600, to the modern vision, when we start thinking of metropolis, of this idea of a city which extends behind those walls and is diffused in a territory, and still it's, for the modern society and for the modern time, it's a system of an understandable entity within a background. It's an object within a field. Still, the city, as much as big it was still recognizable in its boundary for all the beginning of the century, which allows those architects like Bergotte in this case, or Le Corbusier, to design structures which were trying to read the geography of the place, and which were trying to work with that geography to underline some aspect of that, or to also contrast some of those aspects, as you can see in this design proposal, one of which the University of Reggio Calabria has been realized, even though not in a total extension. But anyway, it's still clear that there is a countryside, there is an open space, there is a topography that deals with the project and the topography becomes, and the geographic dimension of becomes part of the matter of architecture, which is very important. You have to think, in the same time where Bergotte was writing the first kind of draft of what will be the territorio dell'architettura, the territory of architecture, in the same time, in the 64, before the book, he was writing essays about the geographical dimension of architecture and the needs for the architect to understand topography, understand system, natural system, to be able to engage those in the formal structure of architecture and to be able to rewrite the geography, right? The geography is writing is in some way on and with the gas, the earth. So our landscape are becoming much more complex, and we can see those two images belonging to the same city, and we see several of these of cases like this one. Like Nördling's Dutch urbanist wrote, the city as a demonstrable entity is finished. This is a collage of fragments, a vast panorama such as in a patchwork. Within this surface, which is composed from several elements, each one of us is going to build his own city. So the personal dimension of our landscape is going to be a sort of catalyzer of all of these different and also contrasting and also absurd realities, especially if you think that in some of these places, like on your right side, other forces are included, which are forces which belong to political issues, to military issues, which are also shaping our land, our cities as well. The green zone, the red zone, have you heard about that during the almost like every day and during the news? Those are our landscape. The sprawl, the condensed, and the very layered system. It's a layered system still. It's not a laminated, it's the one of the infrastructure, because each one it's running in its independent way and going in its independent direction, while our landscape seems to be homogeneously covered by this carpet of light, which is the sprawl, which it's possible because of the street and because of the infrastructural system. So the two things are necessary to each other. And then we work in these spaces where we have the kind of crashing point, the friction, the one that Antonella likes, between two different dimensions: natural dimension, built dimensions, infrastructure that meets nature, a city which is not a city anymore, or a land which is not a city still. So there is this kind of working on the threshold area, which open to fertile possibility for architects to think and develop design idea. And in these systems, the scale is changed, and elements in this scale are more extended. So we have areas which are extended to a regional boundaries that are involving cities and agricultural productive lands and residual lands, and this way of organizing these macro models of landscape through the model of the Dakota and to the model of a regional system which integrates scales, integrates needs, and integrates hierarchies linked in a specific networked way. Then we are going to move towards that. We are working, and we have been working in the past 20 years at least, since 97, I think, 96, in this kind of landscape scale. Antonia knows well about that, right? About the Waldheim book about landscape architecture, where we are moving towards an idea of instead than identifiable systems and connected system in a scale of mixed system that work holistically together but that doesn't mean that they work in a kind of pacific way or in a kind of nice and quiet way. They always often work in a very contrasting and hard and tough way. So we work in the scale where we are thinking about shrinking and growing city simultaneously. We are thinking about how the territories related to this city has changed, how system of circulation are changed, how system of production has changed, how our these elements, which are, we keep saying are global, but they are affecting our local constantly. And we cannot say that one, I'm not a reactionary at all. I think that we need to think global. I don't want to say not local, but I said it. Anyway, we need globality, and we need to look to ourselves and to our localism through that lens, as well as we need to look to the global lens, to our local identity, to our kind of a perceivable and understandable scale. We cannot imagine and talk about spaces which are far away from us and from our dimension. At the end of the day, our space is the space we move through, we walk through, we relate to, we look at, and this is our way of experiencing the space. But we can act in this space in a more conscious way if we have an understanding of the phenomenon and effect, and we can understand what is around us at the local scale, because perhaps that's an effect, a reaction of something happening in the global ones. You read about urban metabolism, and was an interesting topic. We worked for several kind of few years here, and we are still working and evolving in a different way, because that's since it's a metabolism keeps evolving and changing. And but we identified in our we were working on this European research, and we identified this way, trying to understand that metabolism is something that it's organic but is applicable to cities or to territorial phenomena as well. And so it's something that is we are going to consider when we work at the scale of the building as well when we work in the scale of the entire city. And it's a way of simplify the things, but it's also a way of find a key to enter into the issues and try to clarify what is the process we can apply, because it's always a matter of process and metabolism, and cities are always processes, are always art that we can understand in the time. It's not something fixed in one moment. Those are in the second vicenda, nella vicenda seconda, something like that we can find in several cases, and some of those cases are in New York and some other around the world, but as our territories are changing, our infrastructure is changing, our topography is changing because of what we do with it. And this is a fresh kill park, but Weststate just are going to finish soon the Governor's Island Park, and the strategy is almost the same of this one. I mean, this was a garbage kind of collection point in Staten Island that was left to its life for a long time, and then they decided to change it and to transform. West they decided to change it to transform it in a very interesting landscape project where the kind of post landscape, post of what? Post of this landscape was created and generated by the presence of something big close to that, a big apple that produced a big garbage here, and that the life on Manhattan was possible because places like this were around, or they became like this because because of the kind of fast process of growth of Manhattan. But anyway, those places around, from being neglected and drawscape, they become for us as urban designer, landscape urbanist, they became a kind of an opportunity to develop new areas and to transform in a more sustainable places this reality that were almost like forgotten from the map of the city. So from a collection of garbage to a infrastructural element that was in the 30s in the city and working perfectly to serve all the working waterfront on the west side of Manhattan along the Hudson River. But then when the system of production and distribution changed, it didn't leave only empty the waterfront itself, but it left empty those infrastructural elements that was serving that waterfront. So the Hudson River has completely dramatically changed, as I think all of you know, in the past 40 years. And other structure like the High Line has been changing as well, and they are going to finish the last piece soon. And it's a big project. It's a linear park, transformed in a linear park. We can recognize precedent to this in Paris, in the boulevard in Paris. The name doesn't come to my mind now, but there is a similar example. The Promenade Plantée in Paris, and that was before this, but for some way less advertised because it's not Hudson River, and because it didn't cost millions and millions of dollars, and because that is not facing fancy and rich buildings, but it's just a piece of the city integrated with the city as well. So it's interesting, great idea, transforming infrastructure instead than demolishing it and giving place to real estate, keeping that and giving place to real estate anyway. Because the gentrification process that this project generated is pretty huge. A lot of enterprises and a lot of people who were renting or living in those spaces were forced to leave because the prices raised tremendously after the finish. But I'm not saying the bad things. I'm just saying there is always a kind of duality of phenomena. Everyone is thinking the island is great, it's beautiful, but you cannot run on the island, you cannot take your dog on the island, you cannot go on the island behind midnight. You can run on the Hudson River, you can be with your dog on the Hudson River, you can run in the early morning. There is not a closure time unless there is some phenomena like Sandy, which forced the Hudson River Park to close for almost 4 months. But anyway, it's a great project, but there is some price to pay. The soul of that part of New York is changed because of that. And still there are people enjoying it, and mostly tourists. And so good for the island. There are other cases less expensive than that and less fancy that have been always used and reused in a very kind of performative ways, like the Romho Market in Songkram, which works like a market but is also a railway. So when the train comes, the market is rolled and unrolled when the train leaves. It's a kind of a performative space, which it's an infrastructural space, but it's also a social space, a trade space, and it's also a performative space without expanding too much. And it's a dangerous space, but the train doesn't go too fast when it crosses this area. It's not our Freccia Bianca, anyway. Other example, like, that we have, for example, in Valencia, that I had the chance of visiting again this summer, and was something amazing. I mean, everyone is using this park. The park has become a big kind of land of the city. Is rich of activities. I will say that are more interesting the outdoor activities than the indoor activities with those Calatrava buildings. But anyway, the outdoor activities are pretty well used, and it became a very interesting linear element of the city, and was possible thanks to the big engineering work, just shifting and moving the path of the river outside the city to avoid flooding, because in the 60s there was a big flooding and people died, and they decided after that to open this process that took something like 20 years to be end, like the island is taking several years, because the point of this project, that the scale of them and elements connected to that at the territorial scale are so important that you cannot imagine of realizing this project in one step. You have to plan their sequence, the sequence of their growth and the sequence of their realization in a long span time. This can be considered one of the first projects of reuse of industrial, post-industrial structure in a kind of, in this case, in a leisure park. But we are trying to say perhaps we can use our post-industrial spaces, which are often on the waterfront, like all around New York, and from New York I mean Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. We can use those not only like a leisure places. Are there perhaps some possibilities to use those still as a productive and to save something of the memory of their past, instead of being just leisure and again real estate operation like Bloomberg did in New York for years, transforming completely the waterfront of the city, which is great. Instead of being abandoned, instead of being dangerous and unsafe, now it's used and people can enjoy those places. But still, again, why not having creating some possibilities for people working and still work on a level of productivities of this place? I think this is a big a kind of chance that we have in the future, working with this, which still we have a lot in big scale of this post-industrial place, trying to introduce some element which is productive, which productive doesn't mean heavy industry. It's a kind of industry that could be related to the light system and could be related with the productivity of the environment as well. This was an interesting exhibition at MoMA, rehousing the American dream, and was related to the foreclosed cities, which was this has been, and it still has a big problem in US, and I think not only in US, of those cities collapsed because of their financial problem. And so there is a kind of an attempt to try to revitalize, to reintegrate, to reform their life, reintroducing element that could be a catalyzer or attraction of potential investments and of potential way of reusing what is there without being unsustainable, spending all of the resources to destroy what is there. And this is one of the Jenga project, which I found very interesting, Cicero, which opens also to kind of space which are oriented to a specific kind of ethnicity, a specific kind of mixed population, let's say. Lots of those projects are going on, and if you look to the project, to the documentary Urbanized, you will have a series of these projects in less known areas and related to kind of fast growing or informal growing cities and all over the South America or in Africa. This is one in Venezuela, for example. And those are projects which are organized and managed by local communities with the help of schools or University of Landscape Architecture, and so are very interesting because are engaging young mind and trying to not to dramatically change the nature of a place, but to make that place, the transformation of that place being more coherent with the uses and the needs of the people. So sometimes just building a path can change dramatically the way we move through a place and the possibilities that we have to reinventing that place as well. Some other project, this one related another in the same exhibition, but another team, the Work AC, proposed this idea for the nature city, one different, another one of the foreclosing city, where the city becomes almost a sort of a machine which operates at a landscape scale and reintegrates natural element, water, green, productivity, sustainable means of transformation, all together in a system where they work in a kind of in a possible symbiotic way with the built system, and that trying to be really sustainable, because a kind of an environmental sustainability could perhaps sometime not mean a kind of a financial sustainability or a social sustainability or a spatial sustainability. A building like the new Morphosis Cooper Union building in New York, for example, it's environmentally sustainable, it's a smart building, but financially brought the school to bankrupt. So the sustainability we have to evaluate, consider different aspects, not only the environmental one. And I think those proposals from Amalia Andros from Work AC, for example, are the ones that are trying to integrate those aspects and try always to use, they have also composting that produce heat, and this heat is used to heat the pool that the people is using. So there is a way of thinking in a kind of a systemic way, that where everything is used, reused to produce something else or to activate some other process. It's, and that's, I think, it's the real way of being sustainable, where those strategies are able to create and recreate continuously conditions for life. I will show you some example of some of the projects that some of my students did, and in some of those areas, here you can see the flood zones of New York and New Jersey, and as you can see, all the JFK, the harbor, and which is the one in the bottom, you know, this guy here is going to be under the water, and it was marshlands as well, and still is in part, and part of the Red Hook and Gowanus Canal. I saw some of your students, Antonella, is working on the Gowanus Canal still, and then all the part of the East River and the Lower Manhattan here, of course New Jersey, but that's New Jersey, and then Staten Island, and what about Staten Island? But that's Staten Island. So, but we can see it's dramatic, and that's part of that responsibility that we have. We cannot stop perhaps this. We can try to work with it, and when we design, perhaps if we design, or if we imagine to have an housing, we will perhaps in those places put the housing at least at the second floor, not at the first one, right? So, and so this is the map of some of the project, and then I will show briefly some of the students perhaps will recognize those. Where is Alex? Alex, I think this was you're here, right? No? Anyway, this is John, and this is for the lower side of Manhattan, when he was trying to say, okay, there were different approaches. After Sandy, there were all this, for months there were meetings and exhibitions, and I was part of some of those meetings at exhibition, try to see what is the future of the city. And the AIA, the Architectural Association of New York, organized those things, a workshop with, and what was interesting in those workshops had kind of a multidisciplinary presence. So we have engineering and landscape architect and economists working all together for weeks trying to understand what could be the future. Should we build a high wall against the water, or should we be more kind of let the water come in and trying to direct one in the way we can and trying to collect and perhaps reuse. I think this second one was the approach that was strongly recommended and that we strongly proposed, and was exhibited also at AIA in New York, and it was an interesting way. So we need to be collaborative. We need to cross disciplines and to cross expertise and to cross approaches in dealing with these issues, because we are not botanical, we are not a water engineer, we don't know a lot. We can understand something, try to do what we can as architect, because at the end we are architects. So, but this collaborative work which can help us to understand what is our contribution towards a specific direction and what is what we can take from those expertise to make this project working better or resisting longer, perhaps, or perhaps designing their hand as well and their recycling. So those are some, as you can see here, was a more kind of permeable and marshland approach. This idea of the water, trying to deal with the flooding, to creating these absorbing patches and canalizing the water, and that becomes a landscape. Another approach was a berm, a wall, a sort of soft wall. This approach was trying to see, okay, let's try to see if we can work with these fingers of solid platform that can raise if the water raises without getting flowed, and perhaps they can also be a collector of water, even though also because the south side of Manhattan, Lower East Side, had this nature of being the place where all agricultural elements were arriving, fish was grown, I mean, oyster were grown in this area. So try to understand if and how what we call the eco world can help in dealing with this phenomena. If we can, by locating in a specific and strategic way, which we can understand only if as architects we analyze the big scale of the issue, the territorial scale of the issue. If we locating in a strategic way a specific kind of natural or semi-natural strategy, we can avoid, or we can in some way smooth down the effect of these phenomena which are going to happen again. We cannot stop them. In other cases, it's more apocalyptic way. You can embrace the future and say, okay, this is the future. This will be under the water. Let's try to see how we can design it, where we can replace people and activities and life which was going on the water before, on the land before, and that now is covered by water. So that's another way of thinking about a possible performable future. Or thinking again about a system of reusing water and reusing kind of waste through the water to recycle element and to produce from this recycled element. In this case, one of the thesis students was working on the Gowanus Canal, assuming that the flooding process was already on, and then trying to understand what to do environmentally, but also as architect in terms of the urban growth of this area because of that, and after this phenomena, trying to understand what to save and how to save and what it's possible to do, engaging, as you can see in the water, engaging the water and the overflowing water in a process of production and recycling. In this case, she was collecting plastic and paper, using the water to move the machine, to trim down the plastic and producing from that fabrics, and then selling the product realized with those fabrics. So it's a systemic way of thinking, not only in terms of designing the spaces, but also in terms of programming how they work in a systemic way. Some other example of urban farming, of embracing the water, canalizing the water, creates this cistern to cleanse the water through natural elements and reuse for the housing system, and with a connection to the main transportation hub, which are fundamental. Just to recent competition I took part to, and this is a proposal for the waterfront of Detroit, which is an amazing city. I will suggest you to visit it. Very, very fascinating for architects and so inspiring. And this was a proposal instead having, now instead of this water system, I just forgot to put the image of what is there now. There is a kind of a concrete platform with a fountain and a plaza, which it's completely empty. Nobody goes there. Really, nobody goes in the downtown Detroit anymore since I think 70. But the proposal is try to transform this area, which is on the lake, transform this area in a marshland area and in a sort of natural and also leisure system with canoeing and processes, and the big concrete element and the problem of the CO2 of this area is in some way managed to the creation of this. They were asking for an open space for concert and gathering and all these activities. So we thought, why not having a kind of a sloped green element when people can gather and have a concert outdoor, and that stage is over here. So there is a marsh and the water comes in here. The green slopes up here and allows to have a big parking lot underneath this area. And CO2 produced from the car, there is a big tunnel here going all the way and going up on this way to the other side on Canada. So through the CO2 produced from this parking lot and from the tunnel is captured, canalized, and driven to this algae system, which produce energy and oil from that CO2. And that energy is used for the public transportation system of the city. So it's a way again to think system in terms of a system, but also to think that we can, with our projects, and it's urban scale, we can rethink the natural system. We can rethink a way of connecting the city structure with a new way of living the city structure. And another one in New York, which we closed a few months ago, and that for the Queensway, which is an abandoned rail elevated line. Sometimes elevated in some part, and then it's sunk in other parts, and is connecting all the way north to south through the Queens, and is cutting the Queens. So there are just 1-2 trains a month going on this railway track. For the rest of the time is almost always abandoned, and this creates a huge problem for the neighbors. So we thought, instead of creating a nice kind of precious living room like the island, let's transform this in a farmland, in a elevated farming system where you can have crops and you can grow stuff on top, and you have all these areas which are parking lots, which are kind of parking area, and they work in this way. So they have parking underneath and they have greenhouse on top. So there is a kind of continuity, and underneath this area you sell the product that you produce, or you work on that. There are kind of restaurants and other areas, schools, so that becomes also an educational process. How do you use this product to produce food, and the water connected there is reused to water the plants. So the urban section that this requires is not just the section of the building, is the building rooted into the ground and rooted in a bigger territorial system which involves the entire cities and the entire existing industrial element, the housing system, so a kind of the infrastructural connection. There is a kind of multi-layered, or I will say in this case multi-laminate system, which means that there are cross-vertical connection and not just overlapping of elements. And this is one of possibilities. We can be resilient, or we can embrace the transition theories, whatever we want. But we have to try to understand that we have to deal with this, and it's our responsibility, the future that we are living on. Especially is your responsibility. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Professor Santamaria. Also, his lecture is full of inspiring keywords, concept for our project, also in the Reformare Milano project. I want to invite Architetto Vito Radelli to comment something and to open a possible debate that could help us to understand in which way it's possible to work inside the program Reformare Milano, and to try to use that project to reform the interior image of the city, trying to produce a sustainable one and a much more sensible way in which architects could deal with the problem of the environment. In reality, there are some keywords also that, for me, as architect, produce some, to define a huge question. For example, that idea of the voluntary geography, or a personal dimension, or see it as a machine. But I think that that is a problem that we tried to focus yesterday night. There are new contents of our architect, and I think that mostly the last project, Queen's Way, that is very, very interesting. I think that we reach a very mature way to deal with the landscape and architecture. Very, very interesting. It's a way in which we have to conceive our project inside an interior vision and a new responsibility of architects inside the urban landscape.
Yeah. Well, I was very happy to and interested in listen to your two speeches. I think that the most important things that comes out from the two lectures is actually the complexity, let's say also the difficulties of designing, well, number one, to understand and then to design territory and cities. Because we were listening to the different scales of intervention, different geography, different landscape and environments, different economies also. Maybe the most interesting question that I would ask myself, and I ask also to yourself and of course to you, is if we are working and thinking into this complexity, how, as an architect or as a planner, doesn't matter, how do I have to put myself professionally as a citizen and as an architect too into this complexity? This is the central question that I would ask to myself. And I wrote down some values. Let's say, I would call it a decalogue of behavioral decalogue, collecting some values that should help me in understanding and designing into this complexity. I try to read this very, very shortly, these things. I hope that all of these are interesting or possible to understand. For example, as a citizen, before being an architect, as a citizen, of course, if you don't have ethic values, it will be different to work into this complexity, number one. Number two, I think that if we want to manage this complexity in Milan, but also in all around the world, I think that we have to recognize the plurality of every city. I mean, every city is different. It was very interesting when you were discussing the last slide that you showed. After the sketches about Rubattino, you show the sketches about the scale of urban spaces in Duomo or in Porta Romana, and I mean, I think you were trying to size the public spaces typical of Milan before designing a system of public spaces in Rubattino. This is very important. I mean, every city is different. So if you don't recognize this plurality, we will be very, I think we will start very bad the design process. Then there's a third value is to match cultural and economical issues. Because, I mean, if you see at a particular function into the city that maybe is changing. This function is changing because of an economical process. If you don't try to understand this economical process, probably the client won't call you, or you will not be able to build your client. And finally, I think that if you look back to the last, well, maybe to all the history of architecture and urban design, maybe the best example of urban design are produced where cultural and economical moments comes together. Otherwise, maybe you will You will make a beautiful design, but you won't be able to build because the economical condition won't permit you. Then there is another very important values that I understood very clearly in your lecture. That is that we must be able to fly through the scales if you want to design now the cities. This was actually, I remember a professor that I had in Spain when I made Erasmus. The name was Edward Bru. He was telling me all the time that architect must fly through the scales. I remember these things that he told me, and I think that you perfectly got it. Flying through the scales means that we cannot be an expert of all the kind of disciplines, like you said before, but we must understand we must understand the language of a geography or a transport engineer. If we don't understand them, we won't be able to walk due to flying through the scales. Then another values, matching programs of transformation and accessibilities of places, because otherwise we will put function that need to be need a high accessibility in place where maybe I don't have accessibility. We were discussing in Rubattino about the idea of putting another university in Rubattino. Well, now maybe there are not accessibility enough to do this. Another values, taking advantage, I wrote, by history heritage. At least this happened in European cities, maybe also in US. No? If you forget these layers, your project will be very bad, I think. Then you have to invent to reactive the history layer, right? But you have to take care about it. Maybe recognize the ecological limit of places. Sometimes we work in places where there's a limit, you cannot go over. For example, I discussed with a colleague the other days, and he was saying me that in south of Italy, close to Napoli, there's a big volcano. The name is Vulcano? No, I cannot remember. The big Vesuvio, a big volcano, and we keep building, down the volcano, and this is impossible. There's an ecological limit of that place. We cannot build anything, because if tomorrow the volcano will erupt, we will produce a Pompeii #2. So we have to recognize also this ecological limit. And maybe the last one that I wrote, maybe we could imagine a lot of different values, is keeping together urban design and architecture, because the two level, if we work the two level together, maybe the place will be better. So I don't know. We could imagine different values more than this, but I think that to answer to your question, if we have to approach this complexity, well, it all depends by your ethical and professional approach to this challenge.
Thank you very much. That ethical approach, I think, that is the key to understand how it's possible to connect our daily work as an architect to the research, because otherwise it's very, very difficult to follow our values, so to transform the architecture in a values that we mark and inlay in our ground. So there are some questions, perhaps. No? Do you have some question? Or I know that you work inside that among that issues, and so perhaps you could give us some direct idea about your experience as young architect that trying to deal with that complexity, and try to understand what does it mean sustainability, that is economical, energetical, and mostly cultural. So, and also it's different also to understand that we are coming from different countries. So we have also to deal with a different idea of public spaces and way to act in that kind of public spaces. So I'm absolutely agree. Cities are very different, and we have to be able to interpret the cultural value of our cities. Do you have some remarks or questions? Do you want to close the section?
Can I? Yeah. So it's, I think it's interesting the fact that of recognizing that there are ecological limits, because I mean we have been thinking, we still do, that technology can overpass those and can resolve those, but we understood that it's not possible. It's not always possible. So I think it's a good point for our students to recognize that there is also a kind of a limit of what we can do, but there is not a limit to what we can imagine or we can envisioning for the future. So there are not limits in that way. You have to understand really, the limit is that as less you understand what you are dealing with, as less interesting will be what you are designing, what we will design for what we are dealing with. So it's very important. History or dealing with the historical heritage is not coping mimetically the historical element, but is trying to manipulate that and to re-elaborate, recombine that in a new code, in a new language that helps you to deal with that project, and then we'll have the one after you to keep moving in that direction. So it's very important, and each one of us feels the responsibility of doing that. So, and of having a vision. Without that, without a dream of something, we cannot go too far. I mean, if we just are thinking in terms of how practical that is, how financially practical that is, it's not enough. The level of kind of a poetical, as I wrote in a Greek way, it's a poetical because it does something, makes something, and making something keeps transforming what it does. It's very important for us, and I think for us also, because those products, for the one of you who are lucky, are going to be there out in the space, and people are going to move around them and to create feeling of those places. So it's even more.
One little thought I had, because I appreciate the topic of ethical and values. I think I had a sort of ethical crisis on Sunday, my day off. I've been thinking since we came about the title of the Miaw Week, about reform, and I studied for a year with Peter Eisenman, and he always had these games of playing with the words. And there's reform, and there's reform, and there's form. And the title of this was Reform. But reform itself is another complicated issue, and we're dealing on the east side of Milan with a certain number of issues that we've decided are sort of critical issues of our time, of how we might in the 21st century reform the city. On Sunday, I was walking around Milan, wanted to walk around Milan, and I got over by Garibaldi, and all of a sudden I was up in the air. I was above Milan on walkways, and I was totally out of the city. Just 35 steps up, and I was no longer in Milan. I was in the new Porta Nuova area, which is big writing, new business center. And I'm thinking, you know, here we are on the east side of Milan thinking about issues of sustainability and the ecology of the city, and people have been trying to reform the city. The Renaissance tried to reform the city. Haussmann and Dessert sort of successfully made interventions on reforming the city. In the 20th century, we thought we were reforming the city, but we realized we made mistakes. And here we are in the 21st century talking about reforming the city again. And in many ways, it's because the problem is reformed. But I don't understand when I get over to Garibaldi if I got the problem right. You know, they're studying some other problem of ethical dimensions, I think, of global capitalism, late capitalism, issues that have made it possible to be in the center of Milan, but to not be in Milan. And I was astonished. I was in the new business center. I said, well, what happened to the old business center? Why did they have to make Milan become background to... So reforming the city is a really complicated question. I came away from my Sunday being a little disturbed.
Thank you very much. So tonight we have to discuss a lot about what does it mean for Milan, the Unicredit building. That is absolutely what I cannot teach to my students, but I have to confess that when I go there with my children to make shopping, I feel well. And it's only a real estate development project. I think that, and for me it's a huge problem, because I think that a very, very good professional defined the new level of the piazza only because he has a problem of the Esselunga, of the mall, that need another level of its roof. So, but it works, and it's a very vernacular place and full of people enjoying, and it's interesting because now it became the place in which you could see new protests of people. So people that want to protest, now they go there, and it's full of tourists, American mostly, with the umbrella of the guide.
They give them what they have there in New York, in the States as well.
So it's a problem, because if I have to teach something to my student, I cannot teach something related to the fact that for Milan an old architect thinks that the shape is a punto di domanda, punto interrogativo, because that is only a formalist image that perhaps went to the table of a famous architect, the last thing that he has to think during the morning. What I have do for Milan? Interrogative point. Rubbish. But it works. And it works as a public space. And also that new level of the city is astonishing, but it's new for me and for us. And it's another way to connect the city through different
What
arbiters.
happens to the space at the ground level around? It works as well?
It works. It works. In Sunday and Saturday it works. I know that as a typology of office doesn't work. It's absolutely not economic, and it's absurd. So the pinnacle in reality has to be is eaten by solar cell, because otherwise it freezes. So it's absolutely unsustainable. But as a new piazza, it works very well. And for the first time, you have a link between the two cities. And that is because you define a new level of the piazza. But from an ethical point of view, the city council wanted to give the name of the Russian journalist that died for the Putin. But because the Unicredit Bank has sponsored Russian companies, they cannot. So now so it's possible that a city is not able to give a name of a public piazza, because it's not public, it's private.
It's not public, it's private.
It's not public, but now
New waterfronts are not
it works. I don't know why. It's a shame for me, because it's the opposite that I want to teach. but it works. So I have to realize that it works much more than the piazza of Aldo Rossi di Braghieri in Segrate. It works much more than the horrible theater of Viganò in the Parco Sempione. So I think that that is an identity in progress. We have to work about it, and we have to understand also from another point of view, the real estate development, which are the new values that people need, that are all related to a shopping center. So I think that it's very late. Thank you very much indeed for your time and your knowledge that you share with us. Thank you to you that are very resilient. And so we will see you tomorrow morning. Thank you very much indeed.